Hello there, IB Psychology students, and welcome back to my channel. This unit of work is on stereotypes. It's the sociocultural approach, topic 1, the group and the individual and the group. So this unit of work, we're looking at how stereotypes develop and the effects of stereotyping. As always with my videos, I promote the 2 textbooks that I co-wrote. They are full of user-friendly summaries of key studies and topics and critical thinking. Okay, so let's kick off by you writing your own definition of stereotype. Pause the video here and write down any kind of, it can be casual, it doesn't have to be very academic or scholarly, your own definition of stereotype. Okay, so here is a textbooky type of definition. The process of ascribing characteristics to people on the basis of their group memberships. So it's very much a case of not really seeing the individual, just categorizing them according to the group to which they belong. It could be based on their culture, it could be based on their gender, it could be based on their profession. There are a whole host of categories that you might use to stereotype somebody. Now, in my classroom, I have international students, so we have some very interesting discussions about different approaches and different ideas that different nationalities and cultures have. So, what I like to do at this point with my students is say, what cultural stereotypes do we have amongst the nationalities here? So have a think. If you are in an international classroom, or perhaps you know lots of people from different nationalities, or you have a sense of other nationalities in terms of their group categorization, how do we stereotype people according to their culture or their nationality? Let's have a think about that. I mean, if you look at this cartoon here, we've got an archetypal Frenchman. He has a beret, a little moustache, he's smoking. He's wearing a striped Breton shirt, carrying a baguette. There's a snail there he's probably going to eat for his lunch, and he's got a bottle of red wine. Now that is your kind of classic French stereotype. Does everybody in France look like this? Does everybody in France smoke and eat baguettes all day long and drink red wine all day long and eat snails? No, of course not. But there is a kind of grain of truth, if you like, to all stereotypes. Although some stereotypes can be obviously very, very negative and are probably to do with, negative kind of portrayals of groups rather than an overall sense of that group. We've got the British person here. It always rains in England. We drink warm beer. We're mad about football. Americans overweight, eat burgers. They're all kind of cowboy types, drink a lot of beer. So, I mean, these are not deep, in-depth views of nationalities. They are essentially surface-based and based on a few possible characteristics that maybe more than a couple of people share in that nationality. Whatever nationality you are, pause the video here, write a list of all of the characteristics, the stereotypical characteristics that are associated with your nationality. So, we know that people stereotype others. It happens all the time. It happens in the media. It happens in groups of people. It happens within communities, within offices, workplaces. But why does this happen? Think about it. Take a couple of seconds to pause the video, write down your ideas as to why people may stereotype others. One of the main reasons that people stereotyping other people is that we live in a very complex world. Hundreds of years ago, stereotypes would not really have existed to the extent that they do today, simply because people didn't travel very much. They weren't able to travel much. There was no mass media. A lot of people couldn't read. So their concept of the world was very narrow and limited. The more we know about other people, the more information we're given, the more we travel, the more media we have, the more complex the world becomes. and we get a lot of information overload. So stereotyping is a way to cut out all of that noise. People use stereotypes because they save cognitive energy and they can be easily applied to people. We don't have to think, oh, is that person really like that? Have I misjudged them? Not when you come across so many people, either people in real life, people you're watching on TV or online. It would be exhausting to try and understand everybody in depth. So everyone uses categories of people, places, things to make sense of the surrounding world. The problem is that the whole process of stereotyping causes a category and associations that are sometimes negative. Okay, here's a written task for you. Look up the concept of the cognitive miser. How is this a good explanation of why people stereotype others? I'll give you, pause the video here and have a go at that. Okay, so hopefully you paused the video, you looked up cognitive miser. Cognitive miser is a good explanation of stereotyping. It's not a theory of stereotyping, it's part of the explanation. The cognitive miser idea is the idea that we don't want to expend too much cognitive energy on things that aren't absolutely essential to us. So let's say we see a group of Italians and they're having quite an animated conversation. So our cognitive miser jumps in and goes, all right, okay, they're Italians. They talk loudly, they wave their arms about when they speak, they gesticulate a lot, they get very excited. So, and then we can switch off and think, I understand those people. They're Italians. That's how Italians are. So we haven't stopped to think, yes, but are they any different to those people over there who clearly aren't Italian? Why are we just focusing on the aspects of their behaviour that tell us they're Italian and that fits with an Italian stereotype? So the cognitive miser theory is we don't want to expend too much energy on every single stimulus that passes our consciousness every day. It's a way of saving energy. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a shortcut. So how do stereotypes develop? Social categorization. It's kind of what we've just talked about. We like to group ideas together because it saves us time. We don't have to focus too much of our energy on it. And it's a quick way of sorting. We have a kind of a catalogue in our heads, a mental catalogue, and we can pull out little sections and we can kind of use them to understand the world. You know, Italian people gesticulate a lot, excitable, there we are, easy. I'll put them into that little box. Again, the cognitive miser takes less mental effort to put people into boxes, takes a lot of mental effort to think about them as an individual. So, thinking about what we've just covered, I want you to choose 2 of the events that are going to be shown and suggest how each might lead to stereotypes developing about others. Now, the first one is the EU referendum, which was a huge and continues to be a huge issue in the UK, very much divided people along remain or leave lines and has led to a lot of stereotyping. So think about, if you know about this issue, obviously, you'll have a lot to say. If you don't, then just don't choose it. The coronavirus, currently, as I make this video, we are in lockdown. I don't know whether you'll be watching this video in lockdown or well after the whole thing's finished, but I think the coronavirus is probably a good example of possibly leading, stereotyping groups of people. High school shootings in the USA, sadly, do continue. Think about how this might lead to stereotyping of particular types of people who are involved in the shootings, or Americans generally. Gender fluidity, very current issue. How is it that maybe older people, maybe who don't understand gender fluidity, may stereotype people who choose to be gender fluid, or maybe younger people who are very kind of, clear about ideas as to gender. So, have a pause of the video here and just jot your ideas down. Right, our first key theory. This is the key theory as to how stereotypes develop, and the theory is illusory correlation. So, pause the video here, find out what the term illusory correlation refers to. So this is what it is. It's when when people see a relationship between two variables. So they might go, oh, students, they're lazy. That's the correlation, yeah? There's a link there. There's a relationship. Students tend to be lazy. So what is this information based on? Well, it can't be based on researching every single person in the world who is currently or has been a student. That's ridiculous, because some students are lazy, some teachers are lazy, some police officers are lazy, some actors are lazy, we could go on. Laziness is not restricted to students. So this is an illusory correlation because it's an easy correlation to make, but it's not necessarily very meaningful. Okay, so let's think about which of the following are illusory correlations. Ron thinks that all Slytherins are snobbish and evil because Draco and his gang are. What do we think about that? Write down what you think. Is that illusory correlation or not? Fred and George believe that Japanese people eat a lot of rice. Okay, we'll look at these again in a minute and think about whether they are or not. But you have a go. On your own at the moment. Hermione is upset because she read an article that said that girls' spells are inferior to boys. You can see there's a theme here, can't you? There's a very, unknown book called book series called Harry Potter. I don't think you've heard of them. Very obscure, but that's what these characters are based on. Of course, I'm being sarcastic. Everyone knows Harry Potter. And finally, Harry thinks that his cousin Dudley is unpleasant and quite spoiled because Dudley's parents give him anything he wants and never correct him. Look at all of these different types of behaviours. Which are illusory correlations and which are something else based on other variables? Okay, the first one about Ron thinking that about Slytherins. Yes, because it's based on partial evidence from a small sample. So that is an illusory correlation. Ron doesn't like Draco because he's not very nice and his gang are all pretty horrible. But he's kind of making that illusory correlation to everyone who's ever been in Slytherin is like that. Now, I know in the world of Harry Potter that's probably true, even though Harry Potter is fictional. But in the real world, if I said, oh, Spanish people are horrible. I met a few Spanish people once when I was on holiday and they were all horrible. Therefore, all Spanish people being horrible is a Spanish thing. That would clearly be wrong. It's illusory. It's just there's not enough evidence. I'm not looking at the whole picture. Fred and George believe that Japanese people eat a lot of rice. Now, that's not an illusory correlation. Japanese people do eat an awful lot of rice. I think it's something like 4 tons a year. I just saw a program on this yesterday, so I'm very confident of that statistic. It's based on actual behaviour. The next one about Hermione. Yes, that is illusory correlation because it's based on opinion. Not Hermione's opinion, but the opinion that is expressed in the article. Girls' spells are rubbish, boys' spells are good. So it's not based on empirical evidence and fact. And this one about Harry and his horrible cousin Dudley. If you know the books, you'll know Dudley's very, very unpleasant. No, it's not illusory correlation because he's only focusing on Dudley. His actual experience of Dudders. Plus, Harry's not generalising to everybody called Dudley, just the one he knows. So when you talk about, oh, my cousin Dudley is really awful and his parents are mean to me and they treat me like dirt and this, that's not an illusory correlation. That is simply saying this is how things are. Okay, so the good thing about illusory correlation is it crosses over into the cognitive approach. You could use this as your theory and the study for biases in thinking and decision making. Because even though this is a sociocultural approach and we're talking about stereotyping, the actual process of illusory correlation is cognitive. But then that translates into social behaviour. So it's a great crossover theory. And for use in the sociocultural approach, what we're doing now, how stereotypes develop. The key study is quite an old study. The reason that psychology teachers often use old studies is they are generally kind of classics. If you want to evaluate them, you can evaluate them on one of the bases is that they are old studies. So that gives you an inbuilt evaluation point. 1976, I was alive then. I'm not going to tell you how old I was, but I remember 1976, and it was very different to life as it is today. So, you know, this is a good point to use. You might want to look at a more up-to-date study, but for me and my students, we do this study. I have to stress that with my students, I teach them the sociocultural approach for paper 1 section A only. We only do short answer questions on them. We don't do, well, they don't do any section B extended response essays because it just cuts out a lot of studies. Now, if you are doing sociocultural approach with your teacher as as ERQs as well, obviously you would need some more. You would need at least, well, I would say 2 studies per main topic. So talk to your teacher about that. Just understand that I teach this as SAQs only. Okay, so have a read of these slides on the study. They've got another sample of university students, the most common samples that are ever used in psychology studies, opportunity samples or volunteer samples of students from the university that the researcher works in. It's just the easiest way of doing it, but it does lead to a biased sample. Now, I'm going to let you pause the video here. I don't want to read all of this out because you can read it yourself and I'll probably end up with no voice. But read through it, have a read through it and pause the video, and then I'll just pick up some key points in a minute. Okay, so there's quite a lot of procedure here. This is quite procedure heavy. But what you need to do is focus on the idea that these groups of hypothetical people were created. They did not meet the people. They were not real people. It was just like, here's group A, we've got blah who does X and blah who does Y. So they're not real people. And one group A, is twice as big as group B. And the group members are described as carrying out positive and negative behaviours. It's the same for both groups. It's just that one group is larger than the other group. So what they did was read through the descriptions of group A and B and what the members of the groups did. And then they had to rank or rate the members of A or B depending on 20 attributes, saying whether the behaviour was performed by a member of A or B, and estimate how many negative behaviours could be attributed to A or B. So the results were interesting because the participants attributed either desirable or undesirable attributes to each group, and you can see it here in this table. We've got group A and group B. Now, with the desirable behaviour, we can see slightly higher desirable behaviour from A and B, more undesirable behaviours from group B, more desirable intellectual behaviours from group A, and again we've got more undesirable intellectual behaviours from group B. So basically, even though group A and group B were matched in terms of the ratio of good deeds to bad deeds, group A was seen to have, or perceived by the participants, to have performed more pleasant, positive behaviours, and group B was seen to have performed more negative behaviours. So this is all about group size. The smaller group, group B, may have appeared more distinctive than group A simply because they were smaller, so that any undesirable behaviours stand out more. Yeah? Because if you think about society as a whole, you do not walk out of your house every day and see crime happening. You don't walk out of your house every day and see people having a fight, people vandalising cars, or having a riot, or stealing from their neighbours, unless you're very unlucky. I hope you don't live in a neighbourhood like that. It would be very stressful. If you think about life, most of life is people obeying the law, doing deeds which are not criminal or damaging or unpleasant. So any type of bad behaviour stands out. And what may have happened here is that an illusory correlation was created in the minds of the participants about bad behaviour and group B, the smaller group. So even though that it's based on nothing, because the behaviours were equal for both group, a stereotype may start to develop about group B, that they are unpleasant, they are troublemakers, they are antisocial. And this tells us a lot about minority groups in society. If you are part of the dominant culture in a society, you kind of think that what your group does is the norm. It's normal. This is how we behave. So anything that is not of that norm, any behaviour which does not fit that norm, may be viewed as abnormal, may be viewed as strange, because the majority don't do it. So this is how illusory correlation may happen, because behaviours from minority groups may be seen in negative terms or maybe stereotypes simply because the group is smaller. So our second theory is the effects of stereotyping on behaviour, stereotype threat. Now, the classic mistake that students make across the years is they get their theories mixed up. So illusory correlation is the development, the formation of stereotypes. Stereotype threat is the effects of stereotyping. They are not the same thing. And I just set a piece of work recently where I have a large year 12 psychology cohort of over 50 students, and I'm telling you that half of them wrote about the wrong topic. They wrote about stereotype threat and they should have written about illusory correlation. So read the question. Okay, so stereotype threat is the idea that believing in a negative stereotype could impair performance if you are the kind of object of that stereotyping. So for example, I am female, I drive a car. If I am attempting to reverse into a small space and there are a group of men nearby, I may park badly because I may fall prone to stereotype threat. I may believe that the men are watching me saying, oh, look, women, they can't reverse, they're terrible drivers. And even though I'm a good driver and I can reverse park very easily, I might do it badly because I might fear that they are judging me. So stereotype threat impairs my performance. I've just told you what stereotype threat is, but you could look it up anyway if you want to. You can pause the video here. So, stereotype threat is not something that can be done to you. Like, I might stereotype you. I might say, oh, you're from Italy, you're very loud, you eat pasta all the time, you love your mother, you're all your family are the mafia, right? Stupid things like that. But that's my bigoted assumption about you. Stereotype threat is a different thing. Stereotype happens at the level of the individual, believing that there is a stereotype. It doesn't mean they believe in the stereotype. If you're Italian, it doesn't mean that you believe you have a loud voice and gesticulate and throw your arms around and that you eat pasta all the time. It doesn't mean that. It means that you are aware that that stereotype exists and that other people may judge you based on that stereotype. So it's a kind of multi-layered system. So it occurs when individuals believe that their behaviour will be judged on the basis of negative stereotypes about their group instead of personal merit. So I'm going to let you pause the video on each of the following images, and how would you fill in the speech bubbles to suggest how stereotype threat might affect the person on the receiving end of it. So for example, here we have a young black urban male. What might, if he encounters a group of white people, let's say they're white ladies in their 60s and 70s, how might stereotype threat affect him? What might he be thinking that they're thinking about him? So have a go, fill in the bubbles for that. So pause the video. Here's the next one, pause the video. How might stereotype threat affect her? Imagine she was going for a university or job interview and everybody else looked very different to her. How might stereotype threat affect her performance? and for him as well, and for her. And that is a little bit of blurb about a stereotype threat from Steele and Aronson, are the researchers who suggested this idea. Okay, so our key study on stereotype threat, the effects of stereotyping, is Spencer et al. Again, it's quite an old study now. There is new research on stereotype threat, and if you were doing this as an extended response question for paper 1 section B, you may well want to look at some recent research on stereotype threat. In fact, some recent articles have claimed there is no such thing as stereotype threat. But I would leave that up to you if you wanted to add some fresh evaluation to your extended response question. But for my students, we are just doing this as an SAQ. So we're not going to look at evaluating for this sociocultural topic. So there you are, there's the aim. And there's the participants. Again, a university sample. They were students who were equally able in maths, and this is important for this study. Again, you have a read through of the procedure. Okay, so basically what the procedure involves is the manipulation of stereotype threat. Because there is a stereotype that exists that kind of purports that women aren't as good at maths as men are. So their independent variable was to either tweak that, trigger that stereotype, or just not say anything about gender. So in the relevance condition, participants were told that the test had shown gender differences in the past. So that was done deliberately to tweak and trigger that stereotype threat in the women. Not in the men, it's the women that really are the focus of this. Because stereotype threat is generally, it's negative. So it's the women who would be feeling it more than the men. And the control condition, the participants, well, there was no focus on, men do better, women do worse. It's just, this is a maths test, there's no issue with gender. And here are the results. We can see, I don't think, the broken dotty kind of bar there, that's women, that's men. So it's a bit difficult to see on there. But you can see the differences in performance. When it was an irrelevant, where gender was irrelevant, you can see they are almost equal in their maths ability. Where the issue of gender difference was emphasised, we can see that the men outperformed the women and the women underperformed. And interestingly, the men performed better than in the no gender difference. So maybe it gave them a bit of a boost, thinking, yes, we're going to do better than the women. Possibly. We don't know. Remember, with psychology, you don't know anything for sure. You'd have to say the data suggests this. It could be possible that perhaps you can't say, this happened, they experienced stereotype threat. You don't know. You don't know what they experienced. So never be emphatic and definite in your answers when you're talking about results, because that will devalue your response. Always suggest, the data suggests. I know it's kind of annoying because you want to say, it's A equals B. In psychology, A could equal B, C, D, E, F, G, etc. Or none of them. So in the first condition, in the relevance condition, women slightly underperformed, we can see. In the irrelevant condition, which they've labelled that differently on that graph, which is annoying, but it means that, then we've got an equal performance. Conclusion, there seems to be evidence that women's underperformance on the maths test could have been a result of stereotype threat. Again, we don't know. There were only 28 males and 28 females. Now, if you divide that by 4, because there are 4 different conditions altogether, aren't there? That's only 7 participants per condition. Think about that if you are doing this as an evaluated essay. That's something to think about. It's a very small sample. But as my students do it as an SAQ, we don't really need to focus on that in terms of our exam performance. So in other words, women are just as good at maths as men, but not when they are in the presence of stereotype threat. Now, you'll be delighted to see I've included a 9-mark question on stereotypes. Obviously, you can do this or not. I would suggest that you do it, practice it. The way that I get my students to do it is learn your theory, learn your study, close your books, turn your phone off, write it in 20 minutes because that's the time that you'll have in the exam. And all my students do all their assessed work in class under exam conditions, and I tell them that's the best way to revise. Do it at home as well. So just ignore that bit about post it on Teams. Obviously you can't do that, but you might want to do this and send it to or give it to your psychology teacher. Explain one theory of how stereotypes develop with reference to one supporting study. Now, so what does that immediately tell you? If you've gone, whoa, stereotype threat, no, it's not, because you are looking at how stereotypes develop. That's illusory correlation. You must read the question, otherwise you get 0. I literally had to give 0 to about 25 students because they did entirely the wrong topic. And you won't get marks for just turning up on the day and writing a nice exam answer. If it's the wrong theory and the wrong study, you get 0. So here is your answer guide. I'm not going to read all of that out. There we are again. Sorry, bit previous there. I'm not going to read all that out. You can come back. You can pause the video. This is to help you write the answer. 9-mark questions are not rocket science. Don't try and be fancy schmancy. Don't add in weird things and strange examples that are not going to add any value to your answer. Do what needs to be done. Get in, do the job and get out. Don't evaluate. You won't get any marks for it. It's a 9-mark question. It does not want you to evaluate. Okay? So you can come back whenever you want to this slide and use it to help you answer this question. And finally, ta-da! There are my books again. They're really, really useful. I mean, I would say that I wrote them, but they really are, and I think you will find them very helpful for your psychology studies. Farewell, and I will see you for the next topic.